Okay, we're recording. So welcome everyone. This is a special virtual meeting of the Economic Development Commission on Tuesday, July 20th at 6 p.m. And I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:04. And the first order of business is to have a roll call. So I'm going to just go down the list of commissioners. If you're here, please say here or present. So Dave Hammond, I'm here. Kevin Bowdler,
I'm here.
Jim Lathrop,
I'm here.
Suzanne Lane, not here. Richard Ballas, whoop. Suzanne, are you calling in? Okay, I'm not sure. Call in user number 4 popped up, so it must have made some kind of noise. Rich Balistraki.
I'm here.
Dan McFadden's not here. He said he couldn't make it. Bill Hobbs. Virginia Abernathy. Pete Robinson.
I'm here.
John Godin.
I'm here.
Elsie Bissett.
Here.
Colin Hagan. All right, so we have 7 members in attendance. A quorum is 5, so that constitutes a quorum, and we are ready to rock and roll. So tonight's discussion is one topic. It's one subject, and being a special meeting, we can't add anything else anyway. So this is an opportunity for wind companies to provide to the EDC the rationale behind the request for a fixed assessment that they're requesting of the town. That'll eventually have to go to a town meeting and a vote. So it's important for everybody to get the right information so they can make an informed decision. So it's, what wind companies wanted to do was to not only gain the EDC's support upon understanding and getting all the information, but help to prepare for that town meeting, which is, I believe, is scheduled for August 9th. It'll probably be in the evening at Stonington High School in the auditorium. So I think everybody's familiar with the project, so I won't go over that. And Matt Robena is here from Wind Companies, who is the project leader and will be giving the presentation. Everybody should have received a 2-page explainer document, which Wind Companies prepared. That will be available to anybody in the town or anybody that wants to see it. It'll be the basis for press releases and so on. And so everybody in the town will have access to that. It'll be available over the town website. And I think it's a great explainer document. To me, it really in 2 pages really. I don't think people will fall asleep reading it. They should be able to get through the whole thing, answer a lot of folks' questions before they come to the town meeting. So hope everybody got a chance to look at that. But if you haven't, Matt has a presentation prepared, and we're going to walk through that now. So with that, I'd like to turn the floor over and the WebEx microphone to Matt Robena.
Thanks, Dave. Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Rabine. I'm the project director from Wind Development. I've been working on this project at the former Campbell Grain property for about 1.5 years now. And I'm joined with by Hagop Tagramajian, who is assistant project director here at Wind. He's been helping us assist put together the information for the proposed fixed assessment. So a lot of you may be familiar with the project that we're proposing at the former Campbell Grain site. And just give me 1 sec. I have a slide deck that I'll share with you so we could follow along together. All right, let me know if you're able to see my screen.
You're on. You're good.
Awesome. Great. So most of you may be familiar with what we're proposing, but we are looking at redeveloping the piece of land that's right on the Pawcatuck River that was formerly the Campbell Grain building. And as Dave mentioned, we're seeking a fixed assessment for 10 years for the property in order to secure the public financing that we're looking for the project. Just a refresher for those of you who are familiar with the project, or just a quick intro for those of you who aren't. So the building that we're proposing is an 82-unit building right in downtown Pawcatuck. Just for some context, this is the Pawcatuck River off here to the bottom right. This is Cogswell Street here to the bottom left. West Broad Street kind of runs this way off the edge of the page. And then the railroad line, as it crosses the Pawcatuck River, is here, comes behind the property, and across West Broad Street up here, with the circus lot on the other side of the railroad tracks. The building would have 4 residential stories with 82 units. And then there would be a garage, parking, a full-time management office on the first floor, and some surface parking spaces. We're also proposing to build the portion of the Riverwalk that would be on our property, extending over along the river. Right now, it doesn't connect immediately behind the condos, but I know there's some plans for a future connection point, and then bringing it down to the park where the Riverwalk currently exists. So we would be building the portion of the Riverwalk on our property, and we've been working pretty closely with Dave and the town to talk about the potential pedestrian bridge landing on our property, which we would love to see happen. We think it'd be a great amenity for our property as well as the surrounding buildings, and would work to grant any kind of easement or legal rights over the property in order to facilitate the construction of that bridge. And I know we've been working with the town's engineers to release the information that we've got in terms of survey data and topography to help facilitate that. So a lot of you know the property as it looks like today. This is the slab of the former grain mill that was on the property and the debris. This is pretty much what the site looks like today. And we know that it's been a really important part of the town's plan as well as the EDC's priorities to get this site redeveloped, given its proximity to the downtown area. Here you can see the buildings in downtown Pawcatuck, westerly right across the way. Obviously, a lot of businesses in the area that would benefit from high density residential development. But the site itself is a pretty difficult site to develop. As you may know, there's some significant grade change and ramping on the property, about 15 feet of change over a small area. The site itself is also it's not a huge parcel. It's a little over 2 acres. So there isn't a whole lot of developable land. And so it poses a challenge for a lot of developers to come in and do something on the site, that coupled with the market that it's in. So this is a bit of a challenging project, but it's one of the types of projects that Win really specializes in. So Win Companies is a Boston-based developer of affordable and mixed income housing. We also are the largest manager, or one of the largest managers of housing in the country, manage over 100,000 units of housing. We have an active development pipeline from North Carolina up to Maine. So we're very active on the eastern seaboard, but have a really strong presence in New England with a regional office in Hartford, regional office in North Kingstown, Rhode Island. And I sit up in the Boston office, so about an hour and a half away from the site. Win has a strong reputation of owning and maintaining properties long term. So we view ourselves as a partner to the communities that we work in. We don't build properties and then sell them, as soon as they're fully leased up. We hold them for 20, 30, 40 years. I'm actually working right now on another project over on the other side of the state in Waterbury, of a rehab of a property that we've owned for 40 years and are investing another $16 million in the property to keep it looking good for the next 30, 40 years. We have really strong experience working with cities, towns, state, and federal agencies, namely CHFA and DOH, who are the two primary state funding agencies that we are tapping for funding here. And we have a lot of experience with complex projects with capital stacks of various sources of money that are not traditionally used in development, but are well known in the that's called the mixed income community. And so, just to recap, this is the project that we're proposing, which we already went through. And so the project we anticipate is going to have a pretty significant economic boost to the town. So based on some studies that we've referenced, including one by the National Association of Home Builders and a paper put out by the University of Amherst, we anticipate that our construction project will generate about 17.9 million of induced activity. So that's construction workers and material suppliers, the multiplicative effect of the work that's being done and them being able to spend money and increase their buying power. About $2.1 million of new business income generated by the project from both families living at the project as well as workers coming to and from the project. 106 direct construction jobs, 122 construction period indirect jobs, and about 36 permanent area jobs either created or stabilized and supported by the new residents moving into the building. So a little bit about how this project is proposed to be financed. And so, in a typical real estate development deal, it's pretty straightforward. You've got the debt or the mortgage that you can borrow from the bank, and then the rest comes from equity. In these types of projects, it's a more complicated financing stack with several more sources, and that's owing to the types of affordability that get built into the project. So the primary source, just going backwards to this. So in this case, the first mortgage or the debt that we can borrow from the bank only accounts for about 20% of the project cost. And that's because about 70% of the units are income restricted. And so we can't go out and charge the maximum rents that you can get from a typical apartment building. The state says you can only rent the apartments for this amount of money and serve these types of households. And we have a range here of 80% of the area median income households, which are workforce, ranging down to 30% of the area median income, which are low income units. The next portion of the capital stack is from contributions from the developer, either through deferral of fees or through rebates that we're getting through utility companies. And 15% of the amount comes from the Department of Housing. And then 60%, or the largest chunk of this, comes from a competitive program run by the Connecticut Housing and Finance Authority, CHFA, called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit, and a separate program from the Department of Housing called the Community Development Block Grant Program. And it's these two resources that make this project work. Without it, there's no way that we would be able to construct this building. So when applied for financing under these programs last fall, we were not successful last fall, and that's fairly typical. You typically apply a first time. The state will give you feedback. You make improvements to the proposal, come back in a second round. And so one of the pieces of feedback that they gave us was that the project had not secured any kind of local match or other source of financing that would allow it to leverage the funds from the state. So both CHFA and DOH prioritize projects where the municipalities provide some sort or some level of financial support. In a lot of other bigger cities in Connecticut, it's pretty easy. Places like Hartford or New Haven or Bridgeport, they have dedicated sources of federal funds that come into the city that are used for this kind of purpose. And so it's very easy for those cities to turn around and commit to projects a certain amount of financing that it comes in the form of hard money. In towns like Stonington, that's obviously a lot more difficult because it's not like there are a lot of excess resources. And so we haven't sought any hard cash from the city. And in fact, we've been working really closely with town in terms of developing the CDBG application, which actually flows through the town as a conduit. But that wasn't sufficient to get the points we need in order to secure the tax credit financing last year. And so to make up that difference, we're seeking a fixed assessment, which would be a way for the town to provide a local match to the project that doesn't force the town to dig into its own coffers in order to provide some kind of financial resource. It's basically a deferral of some of the tax monies it would otherwise be receiving in order to financially support the project. So the $20 million that we're getting from the state is really only accessible by receiving some sort of local match. And as I mentioned before, in order to provide the local match, we're not looking for the town to come out of pocket directly. The fixed assessment really allows the town to be able to make that contribution without having to actually contribute capital to the project, or upfront capital, I should say. So the result would be about a 29-to-1 return on the foregoing of a portion of the tax revenues relative to the over $20 million of state resources that we would be generating. In addition to helping us get the state resources, the fixed assessment also helps us generate some additional private resources. So because we're able to fix our taxes in place, or our assessment in place for 10 years, it adds some predictability to our operating expenses and allows us to borrow more debt from the bank against that money, or against the operating income that we would have with that stabilized tax amount. In this case, we're estimating that that's about $600,000 to $700,000 of additional debt that we'll be able to borrow based on the rates that we're projecting we'll have by the time we get to the financial closing of this project. So if there was no fixed assessment, we'd be looking at 10% less from the bank that would also support this project. So let's talk about what's going on today. So the piece of land on Cogswell Street currently generates less than $3,000 a year in tax revenue to the town. So over the course of 10 years, that'd be about $30,000, probably less based on today's assessment. With the 10-year fixed assessment that we're proposing, we would be paying the town $695,000, an estimated $695,000 of real estate taxes over the first 10 years that our project is in operation. So that's a significant amount of more tax revenue than we're generating. We're not asking for non-payment of taxes. We're just asking that the assessment be fixed in place for those 10 years. So as a just quick summary, if we were able to receive the fixed assessment, it would unlock about $20 million in state resources, would create or stabilize 36 permanent jobs and create 2.1 million of business income, create mixed income homes for 82 families, would help contribute to the revitalization of downtown Pawcatuck, and would generate about $695,000 in tax revenue. Whereas if we're not able to obtain a fixed assessment or some other form of local match from the town, it'll be really difficult for us to be able to access the state resources we need to construct this project. The site will continue to remain in its current blighted state, and the land will only continue to generate about $3,000 a year in tax revenue. So really not a productive piece of the town's tax roll. Again, this is just what the parcel looks like today. and what we're proposing to do with it. So that's all I've got. So Dave, I'll turn it back over to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone on the EDC has.
Okay, thanks, Matt. That answers a lot of questions right there. I think, so one thing I take away is, I think year 11 will be about $140,000 or $140,000 of tax revenue to the town compared to the 3,000 if I kind of, do the math correctly. So, once year 10 is done and we have that sliding scale of tax payments and they're all incremental, so they're more tax than we're making now, the town starts to collect around $140,000 per year, year over year. So, I think that's important to recognize too, that the fixed assessment's not forever, and at some point the town gains a permanent source of tax revenue for this project. The other thing I take away, Matt, is and I didn't say it in my intro comments, but you mentioned it in your presentation, is that this project, I think the EDC feels this project is kind of the linchpin for, or the turning point or the catalyst for the revitalization effort for downtown Pawcatuck. So you mentioned a number of the aspects of getting feet on the street and how that'll affect the economy and people spending money in shops and restaurants. And it's just really exciting to think that we'll get more people living downtown, supporting downtown. And, Matt, I don't know if maybe the next time you come down, but in Westerly, the United Theater is now open, and that's right on the other side of that proposed pedestrian bridge. So to have easy access, we talk about the bridge as an amenity, but to connect directly to a cultural asset like the United Theater that Chuck Royce helped fund and make happen on the Westerly side is really exciting as well. So I think what I'll do on what's worked for us in these WebEx meetings is to just have a go around the room type of, so I'll call on people. So hopefully folks, if they have questions and comments, have had a chance to think about them and can ask Matt at this point. And so if I go around the room and I just use my list off of my, agenda, here, it's Kevin Bowdler is up first. So Kevin, do you have any comments, questions for Matt?
So I've got a couple of questions. Matt, thank you very much. I think it was a great presentation. My first question is, you said that you got some feedback from the state funding agents. One of which was basically that you needed to the town has to have some skin in the game in order for your financing to come through. What were the other bits of feedback that you received?
Yeah, so two other pieces. One was as it relates to the project's location next to the river. There were some additional steps that the state wanted to see us go through with the Department of Environmental and Energy and Environmental Protection with DEEP regarding the location in a floodplain. So that's a process that we've been engaged on with them. And then the other piece was as it regards to the unit mix. They just wanted to see a shift in the unit mix. They liked the inclusion of the workforce in the market units, but they wanted to see some additional of the low income units. So we've kind of moved some things around within the affordable units to be able to accommodate that for them.
Okay. You mentioned that only 20%, you can only get 20% of the financing through a traditional mortgage, which seems really low. Can you just explain a little bit more what the bank's logic is as to why they'll only lend you 20% under a traditional mortgage?
Yeah. So the bank lends you money based on how much income the property is generating. And so, in a traditional, if this was a traditional apartment building, a bank would lend you, let's say, 70% of the loan to value. And so, because the income is restricted in so many of the units, you're not charging market rents on those units. You're charging a lower rent. And so the lower rent drives down how much income the bank is loaning against. And so in this case, the amount so the bank will still give us a 70% loan to value loan. Actually, I think in this case it might be an 80% loan to value. I have to double check. But the actual value of the property is lower than if this were a unrestricted market rate property, because the rents that we're charging are restricted on so many of the units.
Okay, so let's say, and I know you may not be able to answer this question, but let's say a private developer who does not want to do affordable housing comes along and says, I want to build 82 units exactly the same size, I'm going to spend $30 million.
Mm-hmm.
Do the rents at market rate in Pawcatuck justify, would that enable them to get 70 or 80% of the funding through a traditional mortgage?
No, I don't know exactly how much it would be right now, but the rents in Pawcatuck are not high enough to support market rate development on this site. And part of it, or at least the same exact building that we're looking at. And part of the challenge is the actual site itself. So, as part of the development, we're having to put a garage under the building, that first floor. We've got a pretty significant structural retaining wall to hold up the side of the site where the Amtrak line runs. So it's not. I would say this site is pretty complicated and pretty expensive to develop, more so than if you were just developing on a flat piece of grass in the middle of anywhere. So part of it is the market rents of Pawcatuck. Part of it is the high cost of developing this particular project.
Okay, and the funding that you get from the government bodies, is it at an advantageous rate or terms and conditions versus what a private developer could get through a traditional banking mortgage?
Yeah, definitely. And so the two main programs, so the low income housing tax credit program, it's a tax credit, and so the state will award the tax credit to the property, and then we'll go and sell it to a bank. Traditionally we've worked a lot with, say, Bank of America or with Citizens Bank, and so we'll go to them and we'll sell the credits, and so they'll provide upfront capital to the project as equity, and then they would receive the benefits of those tax credits over the course of 10 years. And so they're involved in the ownership structure of the property. The other piece is the soft financing we get from the Department of Housing, and that comes in as a loan, but with below market rate terms. So instead of making monthly payments on the loan, a lot of times they'll defer payment on the loan until 30 years from now, or will charge us cash flow payments just based on any excess cash that the property generates. So much more favorable than if we just went to the bank and asked for a mortgage.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and that's so that makes sense. So I suppose really my final question is, what would you say to a resident of Stonington? Say, listen, rather than us agreeing to any fixed assessment, why don't we, the town, just wait until a private developer comes along and maybe proposes to build something, and maybe it's only half the size, and not have, where we would not have to offer any fixed assessment.
Yeah, and Dave, I'd love your thoughts on this, but my understanding is that, I know the mill was abandoned, I think, in 2010. The properties sat vacant for quite some time. I know the town has been looking for interested developers on this parcel for a while. And to my knowledge, I think we were the first ones who have really put something forward that is financeable and developable. So I hear what you're saying, but I think that the site is so challenging that it's made people so nervous that they don't want to develop the site. And so we're putting forth what we think is really the only viable thing that could happen here.
Okay, thank you. That's all of my questions.
Yeah, I think other examples of that are the Thread Mill development. So Thread Mill North was developed with a similar scenario as 830G, and Thread Mill South is laid vacant. So no one's walked along and said, geez, if somebody can do Thread Mill North and it's beautiful, why can't we do Thread Mill South? It just hasn't happened. Yardney is also sat forlorn and blighted. So those are the major parcels in the downtown Pawcatuck area that haven't attracted developer interest. And as the EDC knows, I met with a couple of market rate developers 2+ years ago, and they said no, we wouldn't touch that one. So I think the market really dictates what has to happen here. Kevin, great questions and really insightful that added to our knowledge base. So thank you for that. And the next on the list is Jim. Jim, any questions, comments for Matt?
Jim, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, Dave. Can I go last, please?
Yeah, sure. So Rich, you're next on the list.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I really am excited about the project. I think it's great for downtown. Just to kind of piggyback a little bit, on the financing structure, this is a pretty typical financing structure, and you hit it right on the head with kind of how that works with, in regards to bank financing, compared to the loan to value, compared to the cost to build. It's usually where we see that big discrepancy because of the mix of the units. So I don't think that this is anything out of the norm, and I've seen it done in a number of towns all over the state before, but I think it's exciting to see it here done in Pawcatuck, just because I think it's going to add a lot of value. And I think that it's got the right type of mix for what the demand is, to have a market rate developer come in that's going to lease at a market rate. We'd have to do, you'd have to have a feasibility study done, but I don't know if the market would support another 82 units in apartments. There's been a lot of new developments in the region for market rate apartments. So I think that from everything I've heard, there's still quite a bit of demand here for kind of these, a mix of different types of units. So I think it's great for the area, and really appreciate everything you guys are putting into this.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. And Matt, I don't know if you met Rich before, but he works in commercial lending at Chelsea Groton Bank. So he's he comes from a banking background and has some insider knowledge as far as how things work. Next up is Pete.
Actually, I had just a couple questions about the building itself. Is that the final plan, the way it looks, or is that just kind of a notional thing, or?
Yeah, it's pretty far advanced. The colors are not, but the design of the building is.
Okay, I assume that the flat roof is for like height restrictions. Was that the idea there?
That's right. So the project was permitted last fall under 830G. 830G does give you a good amount of flexibility in terms of the overall design. So there was technically no height restrictions from zoning, but the higher you go, the more you're adding to the cost of the project. We did appear a few times before the Architectural Design Review Board, and they did give us some comments about the roofline specifically, and so we added some cornices and some bump outs, which there's not a whole lot of architectural. Let me see if I can find a good image for you. Yeah, I don't think I have any good images that are really spot on.
These
Sorry
are
about that.
more illustrative. I think you'll probably have
Yeah.
some detail going forward, Matt.
Yeah, and there was, there was some, some green screens added to the first floor experience as you're walking along the path towards the building. But yeah, these are more illustrative. That's a good way to put it, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my other question is the ratio, and maybe it was already covered, I just didn't catch it, but the ratio of lower income versus, quote unquote regular, is that defined or is there a range? How does that work?
Yeah, so it is defined. I don't have it in front of me right now, but so about 30% of the units are market rate, so unrestricted. About 10% are workforce housing, so restricted to 80% of the area median income. About 40% to 50% of the area median income, and then the rest at 30. And so there were some presentations we did last year that I can dig up, but an 80% AMI unit is still targeted to someone who's making, I think, like $60,000-$70,000 a year. So really not a low income person, but maybe someone who can't go out and afford something on the market. And then a 50% AMI person is entry level teacher or policeman, someone with a municipal job, maybe an administrative worker. So it's people who are working, but again, whose incomes might not be able to support them going out to buy a house somewhere, or renting an apartment, a market rate apartment in downtown. Maybe they'd have to go out and live 30 minutes away or something and drive into town.
Okay. My last question is that ratio that continues forever, or is that can that be revisited at some point, or how does that work?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So the minimum is at least 30 years that we have to maintain that ratio. And then after that, it theoretically could change. I would say in practice, it often doesn't, because so I think I had mentioned before that the DOH loan, or the Department of Housing loans, for example, are deferred payment loans. And so they'll mature in 30 years, and at that point they come due. But what happens in practice is a lot of times the state will refinance its loan and keep the money in the deal, so you don't have to make a payment of a few $1,000,000 in exchange for maintaining that level of affordability. But this is a kind of mix that we've done at a lot of our properties. We found it to be pretty successful. It creates pretty inclusive places to live, because you have everyone ranging from young professionals to teachers, and a lot of the elderly residents. So it does create a good opportunity for a lot of different types of households to be able to move in here.
All right. Thank you. That's all I had. Thanks.
Thanks, Pete. Matt, it's funny, despite the opportunity scores that Jaffa requests, Pete, to your question, CHFA provided guidance to Win as far as the mix. So that's what they were, I think they look at the demographics and say that's the mix we'd like to see in downtown Pawcatuck, because that's the type of people that need housing. And it's just funny with that opportunity score, Matt, that they're kind of like polar opposites, right?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a challenge. So what Dave's referring to is the state had a change to their opportunity mapping that would hurt this project, that we've been pushing pretty hard against, to make sure that this project remains competitive in the next funding round.
Right. Despite their guidance for that mix, so that so they're acknowledging on one hand that that housing is needed for that in this area, for those income levels in this area, and on the other hand, they're saying that it doesn't score high on the opportunity map. So scratch my head on that one. But anyway, John Godin.
Matt, thank you for the presentation. Fortunately, a lot of the questions were already answered that I have. I do have a question for you, though. I'm assuming you've done projects like this in Connecticut.
Yep.
So I'm wondering what the balance is if the Chaffa folks are looking for an offset from the town. What's kind of the balance of the town getting grant money from federal or the town providing a fixed assessment? So in other words, have you seen other Stoningtons where you've seen a fixed assessment instead of a grant from a federal funding source?
Yeah, so the most recent project that we did this kind of financing structure with was out in East Haven, where that in that case the town was looking to redevelop its old high school that had been vacant for 20 years. We actually just finished construction in November and fully leased the project up. In that case, the town did give us it wasn't a fixed assessment, but it was a different type of tax deal, which is actually what we were initially looking for here, where they were phasing in our assessment over the course of 10 years in 10% increments. So just a slightly different structure, but got to the same endpoint. And then what they also did, because that wasn't enough to meet the 5% requirement that we needed, was they because they owned the building, they sold the building to us for a below market value. So there's a lot of ways you can get creative. The town could theoretically apply for grants and then loan them into the project. I think it's obviously a lot more challenging for towns of Stonington's size relative to like a Hartford, let's say. But yeah, I think the fixed assessments or some form of tax deal are pretty typical with these types of projects.
Okay. And then a follow-on question, just to make sure I got my math right. You had said that because we're foregoing taxes in a sense for a period of time, that's going to contribute to another $600,000 in debt proceeds, obviously, presumably because the debt service is more favorable, correct?
That's right. Yeah, 600,000 to 700,000.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have, Dave.
Thank you, John. Elsie?
So first, I'd like to say thank you, Matt, for this presentation and giving us the 2-pager ahead of time. I want to say that last week I did go to East Haven and I did look all around the former high school.
Oh,
And
that's
so
great.
I have some pictures that I present at the town meeting as my personal opinion of that project. So it was great. I was interested in seeing the structure and how it had been redeveloped. And I saw, the smaller housing across the street. I wanted to see the setting. I wanted to see the location. I did go to the rear of the building and see how the land that was not developed yet was gated off. It was very secure. I saw some of the older mill buildings at the back attached. So anyway, I wanted to have a personal experience and go visit it myself. So I was very
That's
pleased.
great.
I want to
Did
let
you get a
know
game
that
of bocce
first.
in?
No, I
We've
didn't.
a bocce court that it's about done that we just put in on the back there. That property is also that's an elderly housing facility and we've been really happy with it. We know the town's been really happy with it, so I'm glad you got to see it for yourself.
Great. Well, I just wanted to see it myself. I didn't go in. I just, was around the outside and took some photos. Okay. And then secondly, I'd like to say that it's been my experience. I've been an economic developer for the town of Killingly, Connecticut for many years. I've experienced projects like this. I've helped to write the development agreements. And I agree that a market rate developer, when there's an impaired site, an environmentally impaired site, is not going to come in and do a project like this because they want time is the essence for them. And so it's mostly because the time to get a site like this developed, a market rate developer will not take the time to do this. They want more immediate results. And then thirdly, I'd like to say that I wondered for the development agreement, because I know that towns have the authority to do this under the state statute 1265B, but I wondered if the actual development agreement is going to be available before the town meeting, or a draft of it at least. I realize it's confidential and you're working with the selectman and possibly Susan Cullen, the planner, but I just wondered what that looks like, the actual development agreement.
That's a good question. So we've been working on a draft of it. I have not discussed with the town if it was going to be publicly available. So let me discuss that with the town and with the first selectman and just see if that would be an issue. I don't think there's any issues with making it public. And I think I mean, it ultimately becomes a public document because anything the town enters into, I believe, becomes public. So let me follow up for you on that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just think that that's a good idea if it's possible. I haven't discussed this, with the selectmen either in detail, but I just thought possibly that was good for us. And then I will say that always when we do development agreements and projects like this, it's the but for test. And it's but for this agreement and this incentive the town is offering to you, the project will not be built and the housing will not be done. So I'm glad to see this and I am in support of it. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Elsie. Great perspective. Jim, it's down to you.
Hi, Matt. Good seeing you again.
Good to see you.
Just want to say before the group how impressed I am with the building, the site development, the concept, the belief in downtown Pawcatuck, which I am there every day. What a difference this would make in the community.
No kidding.
It's very consequential, not only to Stonington, but also to downtown Western. But I have a few questions. Can you
Sure.
put up the capital slide again, the capital stack slide?
Yeah.
And some of my questions were answered as well by the prior. Okay, so 5% of the amount is developer resources and energy rebates. Does that mean to say that basically 5% of this project is win money?
Yeah, so
Or less, or a little less. So like 1.6 million or less.
yeah, hold on.
Is your
give me a second,
investment
Jim.
directly? Is that roughly it?
Yeah,
I
that's
just
a
did
good way to
32,000.
represent it. It's basically in the form of, part of it is the fee that we would be earning. We're deferring a good portion of that to support this development, as well as we're chasing energy rebates from the utility company that'll
Right.
help offset some of the costs.
So some of that too. Okay, so.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure I had this. So on 32 million, you got about 1.6 minus the energy rebates in it. It's just,
Yep.
which for a developer in the private side would say, boy, that's kind of low. But this is a different ballgame. I get that.
Well, and also remember, going back to the whole question of, why is there only 20% of the project financed by debt? There, a traditional developer would have a lot more equity in the game because there's a significant return on equity. There is not that same return on equity here because the rents are so restricted. It's the same. The amount of cash being spit out to pay the debt, whatever's left over would otherwise go to pay equity, and there really isn't a whole lot left after debt in these kinds of projects. So that's also why it's a smaller proportional share. And also why, a private developer doesn't go and build, affordable housing without government subsidies, because it just doesn't work on paper.
No, I understand that. So you're in, but with the subsidies, probably like 1,400 a unit, something like that, average rent.
It depends on the unit. So,
If you average them all out times 82.
Making me do math, Jim. Hold on, give me 1 sec.
Oh, I'm sure it's in your number somewhere.
Closer to 1250 a unit.
Okay, 1,250 a unit. So that's okay. And that is, a few years ago, that would have been close to market. Nowadays, it's not close to market anymore.
Right.
And a subsidized cost per unit in the 150, 160 range.
Subsidized cost per unit in what do you mean by
After
that?
all the credits and tax credits or something.
Got it. So if you were to back that out, what would the cost per unit be?
Yes, I'm just trying to think of this like I would think of just like a normal development.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna have your cost per unit's gonna be less too. It's not gonna be 32 million divided by 82. It's gonna be something less than that. So that would be about $300,000 a unit, something like that. Oh, more sorry, $400,000.
I guess I'm not entirely following.
It's 390, Jim.
390 a unit. So how much of that 390 is reduced by tax credits and stuff like and so
Okay.
on and so forth? What do you get down
Yes.
to?
So about so it's reduced about 230,000 by the tax credit.
Okay, so you're down to 160K per unit at 1,250 average rent per unit, which is not a home run by any means.
Right.
I get it. Okay, I just wanted to understand that and understand how it goes. Second, next question is about the local match. So before I go, so based on 1.5 million in of your own money, that would be, so 700,000 of town money. I mean, that's basically town equity, albeit over 10 years. That makes the Win net capital contribution quite low. So I guess
hold on.
the question,
Say that one more time.
so when you take the Win contribution of, the 1.6 less the energy rebates, and then you add the town's 700,000 contribution over 10 years, it seems like relatively little net, if that's town equity, if they're adding to it, it's money, right? So that's I guess where I'm going with this question is, I asked Dave to and he actually found some information about the LIHTC meeting that happened. I guess it would be was it this April? Where they decided which projects would be funded and which projects would not be funded.
Sure.
Okay. And I believe there were 6, help me out with this, guys. I don't remember. I don't have the paper in front of me. 16 projects and like 9 got funded, something like that.
That sounds about right.
And if I remember correctly, all of those projects, I don't think there was an exception, were in cities like Waterbury, Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford, large cities. I don't think anything in a smallish city, nothing the size of Stonington got funded at all at the state level. Is that your recollection?
No, I think there were a handful. I think there may have been one in Madison. There may have been one
I think the
in.
Madison one was denied. I remember it was North Madison. I remember that one, and it was, but it just seems like the deck is stacked against you a little bit, just developing in a small town at all. You can't, or is that just simply the scoring system?
No, it's funny because, on one hand, the state is really trying to incentivize these kinds of developments outside of the major urban centers. And at the same time, there's a lot of, you read the way that they allocate the money, and there's a lot of things in there that still benefit the larger urban centers. So, I would say that I'm trying to put this delicately. I think the state tries to spread its funds out, and I don't think it's true that developing in a small town automatically puts you at a disadvantage. Though I do think that some of the changes that the state has been proposing to their opportunity mapping would pose a disadvantage to our project and to other projects, particularly in this part of the state. But that's something that we're pushing pretty hard against, to make sure that we've got a pretty fair shake at this. And the state has updated their allocation plan for 2021. And some of those changes would actually be beneficial to us, and would be beneficial to projects in towns that had some sort of comprehensive planning action. So, for example, like the plan that the EDC has with its 11 priorities, the fact that this site was specifically mentioned as a priority, a townwide priority in terms of economic development, that's something that the state would view as beneficial and would get us points. And that's something that, a town the size of Stonington, but elsewhere in the state would be able to do. So, I don't think it's easy as saying, if you're in Hartford, you're going to get a project. If you're in Stonington, you're not going to get a project. I think there's a lot more nuance to it.
Okay. That helps color in some of the details, because based on the results of April and based on the articles we all just read about how the system might change, it seems to indicate a direction of the wind. And I just wanted to see your thoughts from you. The other thought I had is the property. You said you're considering building a portion of a Riverwalk on the property. Could you explain about where that would go? Maybe one of the slides as well.
Yeah, again, pretty illustrative, but basically there'd be an entrance right off Cogswell Street with the idea that, around the parking lots so these are the condos, this is the parking lots right off Cogswell Street. I think there's an idea that the Riverwalk would extend, hugging the river. And then we would have an entrance here off of Cogswell Street onto the Riverwalk, come onto the property, and then it would come, on in front of our building. There's no way to really get accessible access to the top of the embankment. So if there was any future extension, it would have to come around on the riverside of the embankment, which there's some space on, not a whole lot. But then that would let you connect. And then, I don't really know what the connection looks like beyond the railroad tracks, but it at least allows the Riverwalk to come up to our property.
Would that also involve shoring up the edge of the river where it's eroding at the end of Cogswell Street? Because that is significant.
Yeah, so we are planning on making some improvements to the end of Cogswell Street as part of our stormwater management. And so there'll be I think a slight regrading and some change to the drain inlets to help the stormwater come out more efficiently. But we would be dealing with the erosion at that point through that process.
Yeah, because it seems like there needs to be something at that corner of the river because of it's eroded, it's eroding significantly in a couple areas where an old retaining wall is collapsed. That was built in yesteryear or something with piles of granite. The last thing is if it's about getting the project funded and it's not about, again, Win is a for-profit company, as are most companies. If it's not about the $700,000 going to the bottom line, would Win be willing to commit to either of these two things? An easement as a condition of the abatement, an easement for a pedestrian bridge, roughly on the corner of Cogswell Street on their property, and also taking a percentage of that abatement and using it as seed funding that we could get grants against, matching grants against, for the pedestrian bridge. Because I think we have a willing partner on the other side of the river.
Yeah, so two-part question. So I'll answer in two parts. We're happy to grant an easement. I think we need to understand a little bit further, as does the town, like what is the actual design, what's the landing point going to look like, and how much space do you need? So I don't know in terms of what legal mechanism, but you certainly have a willing partner on our side to provide that easement. In terms of providing seed funding, the abatement itself is, to be clear, we need the abatement for the funding, but we also need it for just the feasibility of the project. So there really isn't, it's not like we're generating excess resources that we're going to have and can do additional things with those resources. The abatement is really there to support the project. And so, that's part of why I was saying we're leveraging additional private resources here with the abatement. Because without it, we wouldn't be able to support additional debt. So basically, the additional cash flow that we're generating in those 10 years is being thrown at additional debt service payments. So, I think there are, if there are other, like, I think there are other ways for us to contribute. I think we've, provided now some of the existing topographic information for the site that we had already. And I'm happy to continue the conversation with you and Dave, Jim, about, what is the best way for Win to participate in this. But I don't know that we could make a commitment right here and say, we're going to use a portion of the proceeds to do seed funding.
My own opinion is the town meeting, there's going to be some naysayers to this. If you took, let's say, 10% of the abatement, $70,000, the bridge isn't actually that expensive a project, and put it forth to that, I think that would go a long way to taking those naysayers out. So I don't think it would be a major contribution, but I just wanted to plant that seed here in case there was a possibility it could happen. And again, I think you have to, this is a very friendly crowd.
Yeah.
I think because they really understand what you're trying to do. Not everyone's gonna, at that meeting, necessarily will have done the research. And it's gonna be unfortunate, and you're gonna have to work through that, of course, as I'm sure you've had with other towns. My last question is, if you don't get the tax abatement, you pull out. Yes or no?
If we don't get the tax abatement, then we look for another way to do it. So, I don't have an answer to that right now. The simple money, again, if this was Hartford, we go to the town and ask for would ask for cash, and we know that that's not really on the table here. So we would certainly have to re-strategize. You know, we really want to see this project work. We've got a lot of resources invested in this project. So it's certainly not as simple as us just walking away, but it will certainly make the process a lot more difficult.
Thank you for the candid answers to those questions. I appreciate it. And I, again, 100% for this project and really appreciate Wynn's vision for a difficult piece of property. We appreciate this. Thank you.
No, I really appreciate it, Jim.
Okay, thanks, Jim. You know, great questions, and you know, thanks for pushing on a couple of those that we know will come up at the, will come up at the town meeting. So that's good for Matt to hear your points of view. Okay, at this point, we've gone around the table. We have had questions and answers. So I'd like to propose, and we've heard, I think, support from everyone. I feel, comfortable in saying that we've all supported what's proposed here, and I know we all support the project, and we support the fixed assessment request. So what I'd like to suggest is that we hear a motion to write a letter of support that would be provided at the town meeting and included in the record there. Do I hear a motion?
Kevin Bowser will make that motion.
I'll second.
That was John.
Yep.
All in favor? I'll just go around the room for, myself, I'm in favor. Kevin?
Aye.
Jim?
In favor.
Richard? Rich?
Yes.
Pete?
Yes. Yes.
Yep, John?
Aye.
And Elsie?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor. So, Matt, that says that the EDC, spoken by the quorum that's present at this meeting, are all in favor of your request for a fixed assessment for this project, and we will write a letter of support that will be provided to the town. And, Elsie already mentioned, but I know a number of us will be present at that August 9th town meeting to speak in favor of your project. And with that, I would say, unless there's any other questions or discussion, we could call the meeting to a close. And I just want to say thanks, Matt, so much for all your preparation and, listening to all of our questions and sitting and answering them. So thank you very much for that.
No, and I really appreciate all the thoughtful questions that you all had and hearing us out. And I really appreciate the EDC providing a letter of support, and I look forward to seeing you all in a few weeks at the town meeting. And in the interim, I'm happy to answer any further questions you have. I know you can reach me through Dave, or I can have Dave send out my contact information. But I really appreciate your time tonight.
Fantastic. All right, going once, going twice, and going, gone. Any further questions? In which case, we'll have something? Okay. We'll have a motion to adjourn. And is there a second?
Second.
All right. We're adjourned. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining tonight.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Yeah.